onto an agenda. I think it's in October that we have the first and second readings for the probation. Okay. All right, Tiffany, are you starting or Mark or?
I think you've done a good introduction there, so let's just turn over to Tiffany. She's got an agenda, she'll share that with us.
Good evening, Council. Tonight we're going to be talking about some follow-up items from the September 7th study session that we had. I have kind of a timeline here for this evening. We have 5 topics that we're going to touch on, the economic model, and we'll dive into each of these individually. We'll talk about the sewer utility and the storm drainage funds. We're going to switch gears and talk about local partnership funding, and then we're going to touch on open space projects, and then in the end we're going to give a really quick update on some grants, opportunities that we're working on, and leave it for questions. I'm going to jump right in, and we're going to talk about the economic model. This, just as a reminder, there was a question as to further information related to this model that the city wants to contract with EPS to do for us next year. And the other part of it is there was discussion on adding maybe a proviso related to this agenda item. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Denise, and she's going to go from there.
Good evening, Council. I'm Denise Stevens, the Economic Development Director. I'm here with Andrew Knudsen. He is a managing partner with Economic and Planning Systems, and he's here for questions and to fill in some of the details. So, as Debbie recognized during the September 7th budget discussions, one of the things you were concerned about was more information related to our request for funding for the economic model. Part of this comes from the council stressing their need for reliable data to make policy decisions. And we are currently under contract with EPS for phase 1 of the model, which will be completed by the end of this year. And the reason we went ahead with that was so that they could intersect with Tisch Weiss and glean some of that information so that it wouldn't be a redundant effort on their part. Also, tonight's discussion is related to the policy question number 3, where we're asking if council supports the funding for EPS phases 2 through 4. And the details will be covered by Andrew here. And I just want to stress that the economic model is integral to our development of a sound economic strategic policy. So a couple of reasons this is an opportunity for us, macro versus data-driven decisions, is that we receive the macro level information from Tisch Weiss, and that begins the conversation. But the EPS model helps guide the conversation on a project-by-project or action-by-action basis. This opportunity will allow us to be strategically principled and tactically flexible. Our work with EPS will build on Envision Littleton with tools to make day-to-day decisions. This will also be information that will help fill in the gaps and help guide our conversation. The data provided will allow us to accurately assess service costs and revenue-related issues to land use, and it'll provide us with funding and financing options. Also, this will be the foundation of our economic strategic plan, and the economic model will allow us to review various development and redevelopment scenarios to determine what proposals will best align with our comprehensive and transportation master plans. And we've worked very closely with Kathleen, who's done an amazing job on the vision and the comp plan and the TMP, and she's been kind enough to be included in these discussions on the economic models. So I'd like to have her give you a couple of points from her perspective.
Yeah, and we talked at the last joint leadership session about this sort of macro approach to it. I think in many ways it validated some longstanding generalities. You know, really the conversation centered around residential not producing the same results that we needed versus non-residential, but it really does stay very much at that snapshot macro level. So, you know, this slide here borrows on that very key note that Peter Kageyama delivered to us last week. You know, that idea of being strategically principled and tactically flexible. In many ways, that macro level model feeds those strategic principles, right? It does validate sort of that emotional response of making some of those big decisions. but to be really tactically flexible, the amount of work and detail and being able to make these data-driven, project-by-project type decisions, which is the model that EPS offers us, I think that changes the conversation to not just, what's your gut feeling on this, but really to having the data to sort of break apart the pieces of a project and really understand, does this make sense for us both in the short term and longer term? So we have coordinated with both of the teams. We understand that there's some assumptions that are made in sort of a macro level analysis like Tischler Bice did that may not be applicable to some of the work with EPS, but as much as we can combine between those two efforts, what we want to create for you is a very seamless policy level discussion. And so that's really the effort that we've tried to put in on the front end, knowing that we were doing this snapshot in time and hoping that then we can build on it. So I think I'm turning it over to Andrew to kind of dig in on the specifics.
Great, thank you. So the model that we're talking about would have 4 components to it, and you can see them here. We've got about 8 slides, so a relatively brief description, but each one goes into the components in a little bit more detail. So if we want to flip over to that. So this is an overview of the work that we're proposing. And if you want to hit the next slide, this is our lines of business. We have 8 lines of business straight off the website. And this is a photograph of the building we're in downtown Denver. We do have 50 staff in 4 different offices, Los Angeles, Oakland, Sacramento, and Denver. And out of Denver, we've got 12 staff, and we cover the Rocky Mountain West. About half of our work is in the Front Range. As you can see on the left side of the slide, we've got those 8 lines of business. I would say real estate economics, fiscal and economic impact analysis, public finance, and economic development are the 4 that are all related to the questions that Littleton is asking now. And we'll draw from all of these areas of expertise to inform how we build the model and how we drive the model. So on the next slide, we would, in fact, as has been mentioned just now, build on the work that's been done as part of the comprehensive plan update with Tischler Bice. We've studied the model, we've talked with them, it's a solid model. The difference is getting into calibration. We're going to incorporate quite a bit more dials into the model to be able to calibrate up or down costs, revenues, operating costs, capital costs, what have you, and such that it can be calibrated by site. For example, we were working with the city of Louisville on this very issue. And Louisville had about 10 years ago, some greenfield development on the north end of the site, but then a few redevelopment sites that really needed to happen. The old Safeway that was teetering on the verge of shutting its doors and then in fact did. How does a fiscal model accurately reflect what's going on for large-scale greenfield development compared to infill compact development? How do the factors differ? And a key phrase is variability. So if you have dials in the model, you can turn up or down based on the variability. For example, transportation, if it's infill and it's adding 3% to an existing arterial, what is the cost of that as opposed to large-scale constructing new roads with the corresponding O&M requirements for the city once they're deeded to the public? Very like apples and oranges. And how do you get a model that has enough dials that you can calibrate up or down for that variability? That is what is the next step, really, beyond the snapshot in time and the comprehensive look at build-out, is a tool that has a variety of dials. For those of you that build Excel models, it's drop-down menus that are all talking to each other. That's the specific tool. We are slated to start on the first component in Q4 of 2019, which for those of you like me that haven't been paying attention, that starts next week. So we are up and running with Q4 work then. And that work, if you want to hit the slide, that'll be component 1. And what we call this is an FST, Fiscal Sustainability Tool. And this has all of the various dials where we can work on honing in what makes sense on a given project, given its location, adjacencies, and potential uses. It will build on the work that's been done to date, and we will work closely with the staff. One of the things that's interesting coming out of the current fiscal model is that 90% of the capital costs are attributed to transportation. That is higher than normal, but transportation has a way of dictating quite a bit of how municipalities, counties, and states spend their dollars. So we'd want to peel the layers of that onion back a little bit. We work very closely with directors and ensure that the inputs in the model reflect their knowledge of how the city operates. We become very integrated with staff, and so what you're getting is the perspectives of your senior staff members represented with inputs into this model.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I can understand a town kind of isolated, somewhat isolated. But, and I've said it here before, we can jump on the light rail and go several places along the line or all the way down to Denver and buy things there, shop there, go to restaurants there, go to athletic events there, do all of that, which is different from doing most of those in your general city. So how do you deal with that?
So the question is, given the ability for Littleton residents to get on light rail, go downtown, or drive to adjacent communities, there's a lot of opportunities to spend dollars outside the city. How do we get on that?
Or shop online.
Yeah, shop online too. So that is, to answer that question, we'll skip to component 4.
Okay.
And
It's okay.
component 4 is a retail strategy. And what you're talking about is leakage and inflow. There's dollars in Littleton now that are leaking to other markets. There's inflow that could be achieved that's not coming in. What are the opportunities to increase the inflow and reduce the leakage? What's going on with the regional landscape for retail? What stores are not represented in the metro area today, and specifically in the southwest quadrant of the metro area? What can we pursue to attract here? How much? That's another big part of it, is how much leakage is occurring today. Quantifying the magnitude of that leakage also becomes a motivator then to figure out what aligns with those dollar flows and what can stop that. So that is all component 4, all a retail strategy. I think that retail sales tax accounts for 80+% of general fund dollars, and so given the fact that it's such a high leverage source of revenue for the city, that component was focused specifically on maximizing that opportunity. If I can, let's work backwards, and we'll catch up with the slides later. Component 3 asks the question, what else is there besides retail? Retail is the primary funding source for just about every municipality around in Western US. However, what else can we employ to diversify our revenue streams? And we do a lot of public finance, and we work with a lot of different cities on ways, and developers for that matter. We're about 50-50 development, private development, public sector clients. And what are ways to adopt different types of tools to increase revenue flow? Metro districts come to mind. Most developers, whether it's infill, apartment, commercial, residential, you name it, are putting an overlay of Metro on their projects. Can the city adopt a policy for service plan approvals that require some of those mills to be directed into the general fund? Can you tap into the developers that are creating those districts and ensure that those revenues not only go to offset their pro forma, but also come into the general fund to offset the costs that the city will incur to serve that project? And there needs to be a nexus, a rational basis for that policy, and this model will document that. And we need to recognize that there are some municipalities, not many, we know of one, in the state of Colorado that's doing this today. But it is an avenue that we want to pursue. Similar to metro districts, there is always the PIF, public improvement fee. And different projects have add-on PIFs that are a way that you could potentially split it with the developer, half coming into the city general fund, half going in for public improvements that the developer needs to address. Different tools to broaden the avenue, broaden the number of resources the city can tap.
So I think you just said what I was hearing, that right now we always just talk about impact fees as the only way to have development kind of pay for its impacts. But these are other tools and mechanisms that we can begin to leverage, or at least consider, to say what fits better, or what are some of the options that we can bring to the table, so it's not just impact fees, because impact fees are also very limiting. And so some of these other ones give us maybe a little bit more flexibility.
Exactly. And just to follow on something you just said, impact fees are very effective for capital projects, but they can't be spent on O&M.
Right.
So to run the city, there needs to be a different revenue source. So, but yes, all of what you said. Moving up, thank you, I appreciate that. So component 2 is really looking at all of the remaining development sites in Littleton, figuring out what the market context is, and then applying this fiscal sustainability tool to all of them. So the model that we build with all of the dials, it's going to get a little complicated, but our staff can go the distance, and we'll have 10x within the larger model with development programs for all of these different sites that fit within the context of the market for Southwest Metro area, both in terms of residential, but also retail. What is realistic to capture for retail? And while we're doing component 4, we'll develop optimistic and conservative assumptions about the amount of retail capture that could be achieved. And then also, there's a feedback loop within the model, because the more what we call total personal income the city can capture, which is another way of saying wallets in households, because that's the dollars that will be spent. The more that can be captured, the more it can drive retail, and the more that it drives retail sales tax. So, and there, we get pretty technical, and we enjoy the technical modeling that we do. We've had one client in 25 years whose appetite for technical analysis has exceeded that of our own, and so we will have plenty of iterations, and if council has a what if question of, well, what if this happens, that's the language we speak. And that's the kind of thing that we would love to be able to load and say, okay, this is what that scenario looks like. And then once we know what the outputs of the model are, we can say, and here are the policy steps that need to be taken to achieve this kind of an outcome. So we link, it's not just data, but it's also data within the conversation of what kind of policies the city should consider and what kinds of things it needs to employ to be able to achieve that kind of outcome. We are very collaborative as we build these models. Not only will we be working with the staff in terms of incorporating all of their insights on interpreting the budgets and figuring out how to exactly get the dials within the model accurate, but we'll be working with you, Planning Commission, and we know that there's this parallel process of the comprehensive plan going on, so we want to be in lockstep and think we can easily support those efforts too. So I think that we've covered the slides in a little bit of a different order. If we want to go back to component 1, maybe there were some examples in there that I want to make sure we've covered. We did a fiscal sustainability tool for the city of North Glen in 2015. And it was interesting, as we know, north side, landlocked, not many development opportunities, and a council that basically said, we have basically no options. If it's not 100% retail, we don't want to consider it. And they were basically saying no to everything. And we built this model specifically to enable different scenarios to be tested. And so you can see here different land use scenarios, different amounts of commercial, different types of residential, with outputs that corresponded to each of the different design scenarios. And the model we built was very user-friendly. and we wrote a user manual, and staff could then take it after we left and load different inputs for different projects into the model and figure out what the results were. And basically it was, the goal was to broaden the conversation in terms of just the way people interpreted retail and residential. And in fact, this site that we're looking at right now is under consideration for redevelopment now. So 4 years after we were done, the conversations have moved and progressed and evolved, and they're moving forward.
How does the demographic distribution, like old folks like me and younger folks like Kyle and people with children, grandchildren, no children, because all of those have different spending patterns.
So the question is, how are the different spending patterns of different age cohorts accounted for in the model? And what we do, and this is more related to component 4 on the retail side, is we look at the profile closely, and there are opportunities, particularly in Littleton, based on some of the tools that you have in terms of tracking where buyers are coming from, where shoppers are coming from, where they live, where they shop, how broad the capture is. And as part of that, we can dig in to the detail in terms of that composition and also what it looks like in 10 years, how that changes in 10 years. I think the forecasting is particularly important because it's just human nature to think that the conditions of 2019 are what we're gonna work with in perpetuity. And we take a step back and realize, no, it's gonna change very quickly. And doing some of the forecasting around that, we can build that into the model to show how those patterns might change as the community ages.
And do you look, for example, because I mentioned this here before, we have an incredible museum that draws people to the city. A lot of them don't know we have a downtown, and a lot of downtown doesn't know we have a museum. And so I'm suggesting to Mark that we find a way to mix them up, so that we get them all around. So do you deal with that kind of thing?
We did a very large strategy for the city of Denver, and part of the elements that we recommended was to have the nodes within Denver. Some are very well recognized, some aren't. Cherry Creek, very well recognized, they're pretty much set. But there are several other nodes that needed to be elevated within the city so that shoppers would know they were there. And so perhaps that's part of the recommendations coming out of the retail strategy is ways to elevate. I think actually downtown Littleton is pretty well recognized. I think even metro-wide.
Would you be surprised?
Okay, well, we'll, all right.
They don't know we have a downtown.
We will look at the data and we will revisit this question.
I mean, and maybe
So-
I just happened to bump into the few that don't, but I think that
Where is
might-
it?
Well, it's a good question, and we'll drill down in the data and figure out what that reach is for downtown. So if you can click the next slide, this just shows the output for this FST that we did for North Glen. We do physical models all the time. We've got 2 or 3 in the western part of the US running kind of constantly. We wanted to make this one particularly user-friendly with the inputs and the outputs so that it was kind of like rough software. I mean, I don't know who here is a software engineer, but it's probably, so it's not quite that good, but something that's a little bit easier to use than other types of deliverables that we have. So that's an example of what that is, and then I think the next one is really the component 2, component 3, and then component 4. This is a graphic we incorporated into a report that we just delivered about a month ago. This was to the Denver Downtown Partnership as well as the City and County of Denver Community Planning Department. And this shows these retail flows, and we did a study for upper downtown. Lower downtown with Denver Union Station, Coors Field, what have you, is on fire, as we know. And upper downtown is challenged.
Where's
And-
upper downtown?
Yeah, well, exactly,
Not lower
exactly.
Capital.
Where's
Central
upper
Essex area.
downtown? So it's got all the 1980s towers and it's near the Capitol. And,
Oh, Capitol Hill area?
well, I mean, it's got all, yeah, it's where,
Trade Center
60
building is there, it's right by the,
Anything except
bus
the
station.
mall.
yeah, and it's just kind of the other end of the mall from Lodo.
Got it.
And,
Oh, yeah.
so,
Okay.
East of the triangle.
So, and no one goes there, no one knows where it is, except there's a phenomenal amount of employees there,
Yeah.
but incredible amount of missed opportunities, especially for retail. And so we documented the demand, and then we broke it down into segments for primary retail, food and beverage, specifically arts and entertainment, and then other retail that didn't fit the downtown model directly, and was more peripheral. So it's really, it gets down to finer and finer grained levels of detail in terms of what product type, what retail store type are going to be most relevant to the Littleton market. The last thing I'll say, because I've been talking for a while and then I'd like to understand what questions there might be, is our kind of stock and trade is incremental and transparent. We worked, it was about 18 years ago, I worked in the city of Louisville, and we started a meeting at 2:00, and it was staff and council, and one council member who was an engineer and had a lot of questions. We wrapped up the meeting 6 hours later, but he understood each cell of the model and found it credible. And it just started to flow from then on. And so transparent, credible, and we're happy to share the work, share the assumptions, and collaborate, incorporate the input from staff and policymakers as we go.
Questions? I have a question.
Yeah, please.
You stated that you would be working really heavily with staff and council and planning. Where else are you gonna be getting your information?
Well, we build off of the existing fiscal model, and we start with the CAFR in terms of the city budget, and that's the basis for everything, is that. Then it's, for example, understanding elements within the budget, operating and capital, understanding how the capital, I've got a lot of questions about capital as it relates to transportation and the different projects and how they're triggered and how they're funded. We'll be just looking at identified projects within the budget, that's a starting point, and relying on staff to ensure that we've got an accurate interpretation of how they're funded and when they hit, when they come online, the relationship between existing users within the city and new users in the form of growth, what that relationship looks like. All of these are questions that we'll be discussing in more detail with staff.
Related to the CAFR, I guess the question is, well, we're going to priority-based budgeting, so how is that gonna be, how is that gonna work with what you're doing in this next quarter? Cause that, it seems if you're gonna be looking at those kind of numbers, we're also looking at those numbers and a way to redo the way that we do our budgeting, which is obviously doing a priority, which seems like what we were doing over here may in some ways end us at the same results that we're gonna get from you. I wonder, I'm hearing a lot of work from staff, council, and planning, and I know that staff, council, and planning are a little underwater right now with the work that they are doing and with the work that's ahead with code and zoning and these things. So I
That's an interesting question.
Are you not getting information
Right.
from outside? Because that, I think, is what I thought was going to be a lot more of this, is what is happening in the market, not what is happening that we could talk about at this table.
So we, the easy way to do consulting is to pick up the contract and go back to the office and stay there until the assignment's done and then hand it over. The hard way to do consulting is frequent check-ins and FaceTime and check-ins to say, here's where we're headed, is this answering the questions that keep you up at night. We can, we're collaborative, but we're also pretty aware. And to the extent staff are busy and loaded, we'll make it really efficient. We just don't want to get out ahead, particularly as we start to entertain different scenarios. We want to make sure these scenarios are consistent with the various work that Kathleen is doing with the comprehensive plan. And we just don't want to, another way we think about the way we do our work is that if you retain us and you don't feel like we're pushing the envelope a little bit, you're not getting your money's worth. But we don't want to push so hard to do an overreach. So it's that kind of And now those conversations emerge and that understanding of where the community is at and what's helpful
Do you get
emerge from those
information
conversations.
outside of city staff,
I mean-
council and planning, and where do you source that information?
For example, on public financing tools and what can be imported into Littleton, we work with communities all across western United States. And we, for example, are working in Boulder County on a funding strategy on transportation. And we started with a national search and generated approximately 40 different funding mechanisms, 2/3 of which are allowed in the state today. 1/3 would require changes to the legislature because they're not allowed. So just to convey the breadth of our research capabilities, and that's information that Littleton can build upon because we did it in the last year.
That's great, except what does that tell me about retail? Like, for example, we have a number of properties that are struggling retail. We have properties that are empty, that were retail. We've got people that are coming in and want us to rezone retail into residential because they wanna put a senior center there, and we're kind of going off our gut on those types of things. Is this study going to give us very, very clear direction as to if we were to leave that piece of property commercial, here's the viability for that commercial in the next 5 years, here's the viability for that retail, so that we have more than just we don't wanna keep giving away our commercial property decision at a rezone. That's what I'm expecting, so I just need you need to clarify what my expectations are.
So a couple points, and we're, in terms of the information that we generated and have generated for other clients around public finance, that's more related to component 3 and broadening the sources. And I think, we've gone the distance, and I think we represent a tremendous amount of breadth in that regard, that not only is outside the city, outside the firm, outside the state even. But that's component 3. Component 4 is your questions about how do we know when to hold the line on retail. We're seeing retail boxes turn into probably athletic centers and various other things that don't generate any sales tax. And how do we step into that and intervene and understand what's realistic? This study will do that in terms of understanding what is the potential and how Littleton can be as aggressive as possible to capture that leakage and increase the inflow.
Where do you get that data?
Good question. We start with the US Census of Retail Trade. And so the US Census of Retail Trade is broken down by store type, and we understand the spending patterns by household from that data. And then
Specifically into 80120.
there are pros and cons in terms of doing it at too micro a level. And we think the best level to take the data, it is available at that level, and we can run it that way if you want it. But the statewide level minimizes inflow and outflow. Because
Then your numbers are statewide?
we use the statewide averages because we think that's most indicative of how a given community performs. We can compare models.
Given the disparity throughout the state?
Yeah, because you'd be surprised at how much leakage there is and how.
80% of the population live in the Front Range.
So what I would recommend we do is run it that way because, and this is not a good answer, but I'm gonna put it out there. That's the way we've been doing it for 25 years. And and then if there's a separate model run that you want for City of Littleton, we can do that. The trick is to understand how, what's realistic in terms of that retail capture, that leakage capture. And that the two should show it. We like to use statewide because we think it's more indicative, but you had a question.
So, because you've been doing that for 25 years, I'm assuming you've gone back to say, how good was our predictive modeling? Because that's what this is, and different than PBB. PBB is a budget, point in time, more history-based, it's more accounting and determining our operational efficiency for the most part, so it's more about our budget, not our forecast. And this is more of like a forecasting model with various scenarios. So have you gone back and said, how close were we? How do we need to change our modeling to be more accurate or because of change in circumstances. So can you talk about, of those 25 years, how you've gone back and?
That's a great question. The big change that's occurred is a little device that is in all of our pockets that shares a tremendous amount of information if you can get into the, acquire that information about consumer patterns.
Right.
And that's a relatively new layer that we've added on to our analyses. Sometimes it's available, sometimes it's not, but for Littleton, we would make that available, and it's a great way to ground truth and actually get a little bit more granular about exactly what the patterns of shoppers are. So that's specifically an advancement that we've made that's gonna make things not only more robust, but also more accurate.
Another data element that you're putting into the model.
Right.
I wanna ask, are you done with your questioning around that?
I think so. We need to wrap, so.
Yeah, so this one's quick. So just to be very tactical, one of the things that's been a gap for us that we've all voiced a concern is when we get development come in for rezoning, et cetera, one of the pieces that's been missing in our packet is what's the fiscal impact? We hear it from the developer, but we don't have it from our perspective to say, yeah, they're right, or maybe they're in a range, or we actually think it should be something different. Does this equip us with that information, so that is something we can begin to see in our packet?
Yes, that's exactly what it would do. So not only in the short term when we're actively engaged, but we will leave it in a way that staff can be equipped to run it even after we're gone. Which is something that we're trying to do where, how do we help everyone move ahead, And that's, the goal is to enable, to build the capacity in your staff so that even when we're not here, the city can be equally informed.
What year did you do the North Bend study?
2015.
And you said you hadn't done any other cities in Colorado?
I'm sorry, we're doing them all the time.
In Colorado?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What other communities have you done?
Right now, we're doing Aurora, and we are doing, Aurora is front and center.
Glad to hear that.
On where else we are, but in the recent, I'd say in the last 18 months, we did Castle Rock, we did Pueblo, we've done Aurora, we've done North Glen, we did Louisville, and we are also in Fort Collins. And some of these are fiscal impact models, some of these are public finance strategies, and some of them are using the fiscal information to understand how growth impacts the budget through public-private partnership. But it's all part and parcel of the same language.
Okay.
So one last question. In terms of new retail, for example, what if the new retail goes in a place that's been here 70 years and has seen several iterations of something? Is there a chance for something new to go in that, or are we really looking at, you wanna scrape the damn thing and put something that signals something different?
So how much can existing retail floor area be reused and recycled versus when is it time to scrape it and invite capital to come in? It's a great question. We can get at that. I don't know, it'd be good if we could be able to hone that down into some specific centers, because I don't think we can address that citywide, but yeah.
Tell you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. You want to learn more about this, I'm sure. So it's interesting too that you said that fitness, we're worried about fitness. We used to worry about churches. Now we're worried about fitness places moving into shopping centers. It's interesting. So now, are you talking about finding certain types of businesses that would move into a certain area that we would want?
Well, one of the things that we could do is identify nationally what are the emerging brands, and are those brands located in Denver Metro, and then are they located in the Southwest submarket?
Okay. Because at one time Littleton did economic gardening.
Oh, yeah.
So how is this different than economic gardening?
This is kind of going, economic gardening is very helpful because it starts with the grassroots literally, and Aurora does have a out of the park home run that's getting national recognition with a very grassroots approach. So we don't want to discard that. But what I'm talking about is really grass tops or astroturf, I don't know what you wanna call it. But where we're actually going after the trends that are emerging and you know, how does Littleton get its piece of the pie in terms of the emerging trends nationally?
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
absolutely, good talking with you.
And council, I'll remind you, we did attach the North Glen report in your packet, so if you wanna reference that, certainly it's there.
180 pages of it.
Yeah, 100 plus pages.
I could have printed you a copy.
117 or something like that.
Yeah.
So if I may, just two things. First, I want Andrew to understand, I'm an engineer, but I do not have 6 hours of questions. I'm sure that's clear. Second thing, I just want to make sure that the council is comfortable advancing this particular policy question. So that's what we're asking council tonight.
Yes.
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 Can I just clarify, is there a request for a budget proviso on this or no?
No.
Okay, perfect.
Now, thank you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
In 2 weeks.
Thanks for slowing down for us.
Okay, moving along, although I see Keith stepped out, so.
Ran out.
Always does that.
I know, how convenient. So another topic that we wanted to discuss further from September 7th is the sewer utility and the storm drainage.
All right.
And there he is, he's back. And so some of the concerns or questions that were relayed were, what are the issues that we're trying to address? We are asking for rate increases on both utilities. And I just want to touch on sewer utility first. So what are some of the issues? Some of the issues are, you know, we share the sewer plant with Eaglewood, the South Platte Water Renewal Partners. They have a number of operational and capital needs over the next 5, 10, 15, even 20 years that we're looking at. They did review their capital plan in 2019 and made a lot of revisions to that. And kind of changed some of the projects that they were looking at, kind of changed directions on those. And so that did allow us to free up some money in our 5-year plan related to the sewer utility fund. The other thing that we're trying to address with an increase in sewer utility is just the repair maintenance needs that were discovered during the CCTV inspection. You know, we surveyed, I don't know how many miles of lines, 140, I don't remember the number, but we surveyed a number of sewer and storm drainage lines, and with that comes the need to repair and replace some of those. And so through that discovery, we acknowledge that we need to address those needs. The other part is we have these additional capital and operation needs on our sewer lines, and so we'd like to increase the staffing level related to that. I noted this as 3 FTEs. Please know that it's a split between the sewer and storm drainage utility fund. It's a 70% sewer and 30% storm. So we are sharing that because they kind of work together in tandem. And then the other part is the rate study. We've talked about the rate study previously. We're going to do a rate study for the sewer and the storm drainage funds. So those are some of the things that we're trying to address with the increase in the sewer utility. We kind of split this out to kind of give you an idea of the numbers that we're looking at just on the capital piece. And we split this between collection and the sewer plant. So these are the two that you're looking at here. We've got some really large numbers out there. I think what is important is that our sewer fund is in a great position currently. We have excess funds there that we can cash fund these projects over the next 5 years. And that's really important. And the way we've been able to do that is 1, assessing our needs every year, and 2, understanding that we have to incrementally increase over the last few years. And we've done that. We've got to keep up with inflation. We've got to keep up with operational costs. And so we do have money in this fund to address these large numbers of capital needs that we have over the next few years. The other part is, you know, we've done it incrementally. We've done pretty much a 2 or 3% increase over the last probably 5 to 7 years. And I think by doing that, we've been able to level that for all of the ratepayers. So we do have a lot of projects on the capital side related to both the collection part of the sewer and also the plant side of it.
Is this just Littleton or is this Littleton and Eaglewood?
So this is just Littleton. The collection system is 100% funded by Littleton ratepayers. The treatment side is 50% of the total cost. So if you think about it this way, over the next 5 years or so, the plant has a total of 64 million in capital needs. And we pay for 32 million, or half of that. So the numbers you're looking at here are the city's share.
And so has Inglewood committed to the same?
Yes, they're working on that. In fact,
They're contractually obligated to do so. Every year.
Contractually,
So what do you
yes.
mean they're contractually obligated? If we approve it, they have to approve it?
well,
What does that mean?
we
I mean,
have-
I know that we have a contractual agreement, but how do we agree on these capital projects and that we're both gonna pay for, split the cost?
Well, two points. One is that we have an agreement between the two cities that dates back to the early 1980s, and so it sets forth kind of the parameters of that. So we are co-owners, and we're responsible in equal increments, 50% each, on the capital. So the agreement says that. The opportunity is the annual meeting that we just had back in July. So that's the presentation by wastewater staff to show the two councils the operational and capital budget and the reasons why. And so if you remember, we get a permit from the state, it's about every 5 to 6 years, and that sets forth the water quality standards for which then we have to engineer the capital improvements to get to that point. And so that's what this reflects. We have a new permit, so the capital has been kind of laid out what's gonna be necessary to meet those requirements, otherwise we're fined. And so that's the program. So as Tiffany was saying, the good news, and this is a credit to previous councils, previous administrators, the sewer utility is in a very good position where we do not have to borrow money. We do not have the cost of borrowing, so it is cash flowed. It's a combination of not only the rates, but certainly the sewer tap fees that have been paid over time. And that's what's put us into this pretty advantageous position. Now, the question is Inglewood. They're obligated contractually to come up with their half of the costs. And I just had a meeting with the new city manager here last week. They acknowledge that. Their challenge is deeper. They do not have this kind of reserve. And so they're looking at all sorts of different strategies to cash, borrow, whatever it might be in order to meet their obligation. They're keenly aware of it. In fact, my conversations with him is that they certainly intend to share with our council here at the next annual meeting their plan to meet that obligation.
And I will be meeting with their attorney as well as the wastewater treatment attorneys tomorrow to discuss related items.
Okay, so to be, just so I'm clear on this, so the incremental capital investment on the South Platte Water Renewal Partner Treatment Plant is to, in order to be able to achieve the new standards that are being required and set in for water quality in 5 years' time.
Correct.
I have a question. I have a question. Can I ask a question? So on the collections, so this one also has a significant increase in capital investment that we've not seen, at least in the past 2 years, which is what is shared here. Can you talk about, like, what have we invested in the past and why such a significant jump and a sustained jump?
Sure.
And Keith has been ready for this question.
It's all good. I wanted to actually answer one. I didn't want to just let Tiffany go on her own up here, so. Basically, as you know, over the last year, we've invested in actually understanding what the asset we own is. And so from a collection standpoint, one of the things that we've worked on is the bill is split now. When you actually get a sewer bill, you see the difference between treatment and collections. That was never present until a couple of years ago. And so we think that's important. Plus, we have another group of ratepayers out there which are indirect to our system, which is people that flow into our pipes through our interceptors outside of our borders. So when we went through, much like the discussion on the stormwater side, there's a lot of work out there that frankly there wasn't an existing master plan. There hasn't been a rate study here, like a full-blown rate study like we're doing in a number of years. And so what this is this is an alignment of the business model to continue to operate the asset from several standpoints, certainly quality of system, safety and security, and all of those things to meet the needs of the system. And so in all reality, there's bubbles of deferred maintenance out there. Much like we're dealing with on the frontage road of Santa Fe right now, that the causation of that situation occurred 20, whatever it was, when they built the Bellevue interchange. And it was shoddy construction at the time, or it could have been shoddy inspection too at the time. So we have to deal with those situations. That's supposed to be a 60-year pipe. What did we get? I think 22 or 28 out of it. So it's just taking those things on. And for example, when that pipe opened up, you gotta look in both directions. And so when you got it open, you gotta figure out where do I go to make sure that it stays. And there's some of that in there for sure. So basically we got a bubble, we gotta maintain it, and we know we have a plan to go forward.
And that's what the 5 years is. It's
Correct.
obviously not going to be taken care of in one shot. It's
From a utility perspective, like we talked about with the Denver Water Project, their lines have been in the ground for 60 years. When we start talking about utility infrastructure, we're talking 50 to 60 years is, a planning window at the end of the day when you really think about it. So, that's kind of the way, it's a long stretch to go ahead. One of the parts that you'll see coming forward soon is we're taking the data that came out of that, because we have a ranking for every single segment of pipe. And now we take that and we match that up with a series of other criteria to develop a risk profile for every segment in the system. And so we're gonna take the top tiers of that ranking system, and that'll allow us to make decisions about how we proceed with our investments. So that there's a different risk profile if you have a pipe that breaks and takes 100 jobs offline or 2 homes, and where is it located in your watershed? Are you risking the South Platte? And it's adding all those kind of risks in to help prioritize the way you tactically take on your system over time.
So is this gonna be like our new norm? Do we need to now, even 10 years out, or is this a little bit, or maybe a lot of catch-up? Because as we make these significant investments, are we gonna gain another 50 years that we?
Yeah, I think that on the sewer side, I think we're in a much better position than we actually kind of thought we were gonna be. So one of the things that comes out of the rate study will be, right now it's showing 3%, 3%, 3%. Part of the rate study is we take the data of the services study occurring at the plant right now, and then as well as our capital work and our maintenance work and all those kind of things, and how do those fit together to build the rate out. The FTEs you see, for example, are we own a camera truck. But for the last 5 years, the only camera work the city has done is basically 100% reactive. When a problem exists, we gotta go look at it. That's not a position we need to be in. Most systems camera a fifth of their system every year. So you're on a 5-year cycle to get your whole system, and those are the things that we have to move into as well. One of the other things too, as part of this, is a side note, is succession planning within that particular work group is kind of important right now. So that's kind of where it is.
So was the answer that this is bumped up now temporarily to catch up, but then may come down, or this is the new?
It's possible that it may come down. We're still in the process of building out that 20-year capital plan and the maintenance plan that goes with it. What you see in terms of the operational side with the personnel and the equipment that goes with that's the new norm.
Yeah, I'm asking from the capital.
I think we're okay, but we'll just, I can't answer that fully right now, but we're in the process of that. I do think at some level it will be the new norm. Kyle?
Question sort of along those lines with the rate study, how the rate study will affect those, 3% rates. Obviously, we're only talking about this year, those are just estimates, but looking at the bottom line with the ending cash balance, and we keep talking about how we're in such a good position now. You look at 2024, we're down 30% of what we have, and I don't think we're at that point saying we're in this great shape that we can absorb some big capital investments here. And so that's what, was was there discussion that, you know, having rather than a 3% increase, you know, going up to 4 or whatever, and obviously the rate study will inform that.
You know, one of the things that's really great about the rate study is when you do a rate study, as we work through that process with this group here, one of the things we'll get to a point of is, you know, there could be 5 or 10 different rate strategies about where you need to be over the next decade. And so you could choose to go with consistent, maybe it's a consistent 3s, maybe you know, there's a lot of different ways, and that's part of why you bring in a firm like that to help us look at that range of scenarios so that we can really understand where we're going. So that's gonna be a big discussion here next year with all of us.
It's just that, yeah, that net ending cash balance in 2024 is a little concerning to me right now with only 3%.
And that's a philosophical discussion that council makes, you know, as the board of directors for that utility, so.
Chair.
So now, our reserves, Littleton reserves for the sewer plant are pretty good right now, right?
Right.
And Inglewood's are not, is that correct?
That's correct.
And their fees are a third higher than ours, ours are 2/3 of what their fees are. How does that happen? How does that imbalance happen?
Well, I think,
What's up, Kyle? What?
you know, I don't know enough about their utilities, but I'm understanding that they charge a pretty small, if any, on the sewer tap fee. And I'm not sure what the history of that is, but I think that's a significant difference between us and them. So we have I think it's, $5,000 for a single family home. You know, I'd say that's probably on par with a lot of cities. We've been charging that for a long time. So that is in essence an investment that those developments are making into the plant. That's the purpose of a tap fee. So we've been collecting that, and again, with credit to our previous councils and administrators. In the case of Inglewood, I don't think they took advantage of that opportunity.
But as I look at our storm drainage fees, you know, we're the lowest, at least of the ones they showed for our range. But
There isn't anybody lower to find.
we are the lowest, without doubt. This doesn't it moves us ahead of Lakewood by a few cents. But I guess I'm more concerned about Inglewood. I mean, yeah, we have a contract, but a contract's only as good as they can perform.
Yes, and I've had pretty in-depth conversations with them, and again, their new city manager, and they assure me that they're gonna take the tough issue on. And it is a tough issue for them financially. These are hard conversations and trying to generate enough revenue in a short period of time. So I have to take them for their word that they're gonna take this on, and I'm sure that's true. And they fully intend to share that strategy here with our council here by the next annual meeting.
Good, because this is something we've been hearing for quite a while. So hopefully now with new folks, we can actually get some performance out.
So, question about the 5 years, I think you said, looking at all of the underground stuff, is that right, about a fifth a year? So that means at any given time, you aren't seeing 4/5. How confident are you right now that something you haven't seen doesn't have a lot of excitement?
We just looked at everything. That's what we did over the last year, because we've never really looked at everything before. That was the big project, so.
And I thought that we'd done
Yeah.
that, but.
So going forward, I mean, from an industry best practice, that's a strategy, and if you have segments that you know are, you know, ongoing challenges, you know, an example would be there's certain segments in your community where you're always gonna have root issues. So, you know, you go check those locations on a more regular basis. And so you just build that into your work plan, and that's something that work plan, frankly, due to the lack of staffing, has just not occurred in the past. They've done as best they can, let's put it that way. They're really good.
I probably did, but I forgot. Sorry.
That's okay. We need to keep moving on this one.
Alright, the next slide is just the 5-year plan, and this is in your budget document as well, and we did attach this, just so you have that information. This was a budget highlight. We did not have a policy question for council related to the sewer utility increase, but we are recommending a 3% increase on that. And I'll show you a slide of how sewer and storm, what the rates will look like once we get through storm. So now I'm gonna switch to storm, and if you compared the two slides, they're pretty much the same. Basically, you know, the same thing as we have capital improvements and maintenance needs with the storm drainage. This one, we're really changing our strategy on this, and we're trying to be more proactive than reactive, just so we don't run into any large issues that others might have recently been involved in. I think the number one key thing, and Keith has talked about this previously, is that we identified 40% more lines than we were even aware of. And assessing.
One more time?
We identified 40% more storm drainage lines than we had originally thought we had. And so with that, again, comes repair and maintenance on those lines. Now that we're aware of it, we're gonna try to address that over the next.
Well, we were doing maintenance, sorry.
Keith, could you elaborate on that 40% more than originally identified?
So when you go out there with the camera and you stick it in the manhole and you start going, that's what you see. And so
How did we not know that?
well, you know, it's actually, I was thinking about this earlier today, and I was co-speaking with another public works director here in the area came to his city 30 years ago. And back before aerial photography and all that. And the experience that we're going through right now with finding additional pipe, they went through in 1988 and added that into their system. We just, the work just wasn't done here before, you know, everybody did the mapping, I think, as best they could, and there's gaps out there, and now we know what we got, and so we gotta figure out what to do with it.
Thanks.
How do you maintain or service these lines? So if you didn't know, does that mean you weren't regularly maintaining it or servicing it, or?
So one of the things that's built into this 2020 specifically related to stormwater is there's there's a good percentage of pipes within our system which have extremely high sedimentation levels, meaning they haven't been cleaned. And that when you got that situation, that's a risk to safety, to property, and all those things. And so, one of the things you see in 2020 is an accelerated, basically jetting program to get those pipes cleared out. There's a bump in that in 2020
So
for
because
sure.
we didn't know they were there, they weren't getting some regular maintenance on sedimentary cleanup?
Certainly, there's those, and then there's some that just over time just didn't get touched, you know, for various reasons, it looks like.
Well, I think one of the largest reasons is we've never put the money into the storm sewer or the storm drainage issue, and so there hasn't been the money to do the things that you said we needed to do. We did bare minimum.
Is there any thought given if they're loaded with sediment, what that does to the river?
Well, that's part of why we're doing that, because the four components of the work that you do in stormwater are basically maintenance of your major drainage ways, kind of local stormwater projects, basic maintenance, and then water quality. Our MS4 permit is really tied to water quality, and that's what drives everything here. The sweeping that we do out there is for water quality. It's not for really anything else.
Streets look pretty.
Street sweeping is, yes, not to make them look pretty. So, there's a lot of different opinions on that based on folks that call me. I can assure you that. But, you know, that's really, you know, for us, at the end, every pipe in this city leads to that river at the end of the day. And so that's something that's always in the front and center. And one of the other things too that I think is important to highlight is, in the last couple of years, as I think I've shared with you, is that we've changed how we dynamically run our engineering group. We've moved to, as opposed to a large number of generalists, we have subject matter experts who also have general engineering skills. And this is a particular area, you've seen Carolyn come and speak with you, where that's made a huge difference in our ability to successfully manage the work that we do, come up with creative alternatives and those kind of things too. So that's been a big help in there.
Where does the Highline Canal project fit into this?
Okay, so there was a question that came up at the last council meeting, and so I can provide some clarification to that line here. So the Highline Canal is a ditch. Ditch companies in Colorado historically do not take stormwater flows into them. There's a number of reasons for that, but it just doesn't occur. And so as the Highline is basically going offline, which is what it's doing, in our discussions with Denver Water, all of us along the corridor have had discussions about, okay, if this is gonna be the case, can we put some stormwater into the ditch? We have a couple of locations, like we have one at the end of Windweir where frankly, decades ago, we built a siphon to move the stormwater underneath the ditch and out the other side. Obviously maintenance problem. And so that's a place where let's dump the stormwater in there. Typically what happens when you deal with a ditch company is first they ask you to take like 20 miles in each direction from where you're doing work, but you work them down to about a half mile in each direction from a maintenance perspective. And so at those locations, we'll agree, you'll see IGA soon on this, where we're gonna dump stormwater in there, we'll pick up some in-ditch maintenance, and do that. The amount of flows that are going to go into the High Line, we're not gonna have huge flows. We don't have huge flows that would ever enter the High Line, even through the ones we're dumping in there. So there's not gonna be the level of flows to, for the community to see flow through our community. It's just not, the magnitude of water is just not that much here in Colorado. So for us, it's the High Line, first and foremost, is a critical recreational asset to all the communities along the way. From our perspective, it's also a great place for us to put stormwater to make our system safer and better for everybody. And even before it dumps into the canal, all the water quality stuff that would control the water and everything before it got to the South Platte, all that stuff is required before it goes into the High Line too. So, we're making sure that stays in great shape as best we can.
Did you say the city of Littleton's gonna do maintenance on Denver Water's property?
Yes, so actually we do already. South Suburban does maintenance in our section for all the trails and up to a certain point. And then there's kind of a delineation 6 or 8 feet back from the edge of the ditch. And within that, we're gonna kind of take that over. It's really just debris clearing and some mowing and stuff. More than likely, we're gonna contract that out. We may do that with another
But
jurisdiction.
we're still paying for it, so regardless of
Yeah,
what
I
we're
mean,
doing,
well,
yeah.
the amount of work's not,
We, the city
it's
of
really
Littleton,
not, I mean, we did some analysis on this and that number's not very high, so. More than likely, we'll probably partner with another jurisdiction that's more equipped to do that. Is probably the strategy we're gonna use, so.
So I wanna make sure I heard the answer clear. So this proposal that we are working on, that stormwater goes into the Highline Canal, or that's another place it can go, is already incorporated into these costs, whether it be operational or capital.
Correct.
Thank you.
So a couple of things, we're proposing a phased-in approach for a rate increase on the storm drainage, just based on the operations and maintenance needs that we have over the next 5 years. I'll remind you, we're gonna do a rate study with storm drainage as well. So currently, we do have a phased-in approach. There was a question as to, what might the rates look like if we were to do everything that we wanted to or needed to immediately. And if you wanted to do that, the rate would have to more than double in 2020 to be able to address all of those needs immediately. So we went back to staff and worked with them, and they came up with a 5-year plan that you have in your packet, which we didn't have prior to a couple of years ago, that really let you know what types of projects we're planning on the next 5 years, rather than doing it on an annual basis. So again, we have a 5-year plan currently for storm drainage.
So how does the rate study, how do they do a rate study? Do they look at all of your projects that you have and say, oh, it's gonna cost you more? So are we influencing what that rate study is, in essence, by saying, here's all the projects we wanna do, and they're saying, okay, we'll divide it by,
Well,
yep,
so-
it's 40%,
Certainly, Mark and I have been through a few of these in our career. And so, when you go into a rate study, you start out with, what are you paying now? What does the future look like in sewer? What are your regulations gonna change? And you factor all those components in, and then you say, what can we accomplish? What's reasonable? And so, we take a look at the projects, we take a look at the maintenance requirements, all of those things are part of that. And then, you factor that out and you look at a variety of rate structures that can do that. And at the end of the day, we can make recommendations, but this body is still in essence, the board of directors for the utility. And so you are the rate setters. And so, we can come in and say XX, and you could say, no, we're gonna go half of X. And, I've seen that. And so that's part of the discussion. The other part for me is that I don't necessarily think, much like we're talking about right here, I wanna be able to provide you the best information when you're making that decision. And that's why not only is this technical work critical, but also that rate study to say, this is what we think is a good plan, so that you are making as informed a decision as possible when we're setting the rates for our customers out there.
And you're confident, I asked this at the budget meeting as well, you're confident that the 40% that we're proposing now is almost like a no-brainer. When the rate study comes back, it's gonna be 40%, if not more. So this is one that you feel like we already know we're way behind the curve on
Yes.
this.
Well, we were actually, there was a graphic today that Tiffany put together that showed our rates over the last number of years.
Oh.
And she compressed 20 years into one column because it was just flat for 20 years. You know, Mark and I have both heard the story of, you know, getting here and hearing the statement that we're really proud that we didn't change our rates in 20 years.
That rate.
That particular rate. So, you know.
So this was really interesting, but you didn't show that for sewer. So how do we look at sewer? Because at the end of the day, the customer, the citizen is, you know, not necessarily looking, oh, how much am I paying for storm? How much am I paying for sewer? They have one bill they have to pay at the end of the year. And I know you have a graph here, but I was just curious, you know, what's the comparison of, you know, sewer with these other jurisdictions? So when I am a Littleton citizen and I'm paying $300 today, and, you know, over 300 and close and 400 in a few years. So what does that look like compared to if I lived in Underwood or somewhere else in total, not just?
This actually, you can see that, but this actually came up in our, we were having this discussion in our meeting, since I live in another jurisdiction that's very high on that list, as you see right there. I actually pulled up my utility bill, and the amount I pay per quarter for those two exceeds what we pay per year here.
So is this similar so would we see the same thing for sewer?
You probably would. I think sewer is a little different because jurisdictions set their rates differently for sewer than we do. Some do a flat rate like we do, but others do it based on consumption.
So is there a reason we didn't show that here? It was just.
I don't think it was asked.
Yeah,
Not
not
asked.
particularly.
Yeah.
I think we do have a chart.
Yeah, I can forward a line to everybody, there's a, every other year in partnership with the state, everybody supplies as best we can rate study data, our current rates, so you can see across the state, you know, sometimes it's apples and oranges, but you can get, it tells you what everybody else is paying, so I can pass that along. So I think the last one they did was 2017 data, so I can pass that along to everybody, and it shows all of that, both for storm and sewer.
We all do the same work. Does storm drainage in Littleton do the same thing that storm drainage in Aurora does? Like how do they justify?
So I'll give you an example why Fort Collins is so high. So our planning window here is a 5-year flood event, okay? Whereas if you go to Fort Collins, there's portions of the city where they've chosen to make their stormwater standard how to contain a 100-year event. So, you know, that goes from a pipe this big to a pipe way bigger than that. And that's where you see the change. So there's a philosophical question, and then the other part too is some communities certainly invest more in the education and outreach side than we currently do. Is another kind of differentiator, I would say.
Okay, we need to keep moving. Corinne, if you have some additional questions, you
okay.
can go offline with staff. I do want to make a comment regarding all of this. A number of years ago, maybe 10 or 11 years ago, council made a very, very, very difficult decision to adjust the sewer rates. We were in severe trouble. We were in Englewood trouble because the EPA had been somewhat silent. The EPA stopped their silence and they started sending down these scary numbers. And so we did some extensive rate studies and we did a lot of work, and we ended up going in and having to do some substantial rate increases. We were enemy number one for a while because of that. We got them to a place where we were able to just do the slow incrementation, but as you can tell, it put us in a position, a very healthy position, and we had to bite that apple when we had to make those decisions, and that's what councils do. They make those tough decisions. We pay these rates too. We're raising our own rates. So I think that that's why we are in good shape. We are not in good shape with Storm. Storm is certainly not as expensive as the sewer either. But you're right, there was a brag and a boast that we hadn't raised those rates, and there was never an explanation as to what that repercussion was. And now we're seeing it. So this is the time. It's incumbent upon us not to get ourselves into a situation that we're seeing other communities, because we don't have the courage to do the rate increase we need to do. And I think this is a minimal one in terms of what we deemed we had to send on the sewer one. This chart, I think, is incredibly telling. I'll let you guys wrap it and then we'll make a move.
Sure. So this graph just shows what the sewer and the storm drainage rate is combined together. So like Karina was mentioning, they get one bill and they want to see what that total bill is. So this kind of gives you the graphical representation of what that might look like over the next 5 years based on the current plans that we have. So you can see what percentage is sewer and what percentage is storm drainage on there. So the one thing that I did realize that didn't make it in the PowerPoint is we did have a policy question related to the storm drainage increase in the rate. And it's a $13.64 annual increase. So it's a little over $1 a month in total, so.
Policy question 6. Council, anybody have a problem moving that forward? Okay.
The other thing is we will definitely put this information on the website and explain the rate, what it is. We're talking about doing maybe some kind of insert with our bill this year, just kind of explaining some of the projects that we're planning for the next few years, so.
That's not what we've all been waiting for.
Yeah.
We're only about 15 minutes behind, so.
Sorry, it's my fault. This will go fast.
We're moving.
So our next topic is local partnership funding. And Sam is gonna come up and kind of guide us on this one.
So we had 23 applications, 159,000 requested, about 55,000 in in-kind services. This was a policy question. We did do this a little differently this year. We had council make recommendations individually. Staff put a summary of that together and included in those final proposed numbers places where staff or 4 of council members recommended an award. If at least 4 people were on the same award amount, that's the amount recommended. If there were 4 people who recommended award but there wasn't a sort of consistent amount, we took the average of those recommendations, and that's what you see in your proposed document.
Okay.
I know Karina has issue, one thing I noticed though is the recommended 2020 here is 20% higher than any single council member by themselves. And so I think that's, a little out of line than with what all the recommendations are there. So I think we need to rectify that.
How would you recommend rectifying that?
Well, Karina had a suggestion, I have a counter suggestion, I don't know if you wanna go first.
Okay, we are not gonna spend all night on
No.
this.
Oh,
We are not, trust me. No, Mark had a I'm gonna say what you said. Yay! We've got about an $80,000 decision, and we spend more time on it than we spend on an $80 million decision. We are done at 8 o'clock on this one, period.
That sounds good to me.
All right,
Sounds good.
Karina,
And you want me to just jump, or is there more that you wanna talk
no,
through?
go.
That's all I have.
They're done.
So, when I looked at this, kind of a little bit to your point, Debbie, of, we're talking 80,000 or 100,000, whatever it may be. But I think what's more important about this discussion is, we've talked about doing this different, being much more strategic and putting the money where it fits into our overall, what we want to achieve from Littleton. So my recommendation is, while staff is recommending 4 and above, if you look, 4 and above means everybody gets something, which doesn't make sense to me, doesn't sound strategic, and doesn't sound focused. So my recommendation is that 7 means we all agreed that these were critical services, critical organizations that are doing a lot of great work, and those are the ones we should fund. We are being very direct and strategic, saying we're all on board. There is no question about this. So my recommendation is we support all of the sevens, and the in-kinds make sense to me. So I would suggest all of the sevens, based on the average that you guys calculated that. You know, I agree with Cal, maybe we need to revisit. The sevens alone make up the 62,000. So to me, that's where we need to be. The second reason I make that recommendation is we have an important study going on right now for the homeless population. We know that that's gonna come back with some asks and some recommendations, and I think that's exactly the way we should be looking at this. Let's study what the issue is and then be able to be prepared to fund and support what recommendations come from that. So part of this recommendation is to set aside some of that money for data-driven decisions.
Anybody else?
You know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You wanna go first, or?
I just was gonna say, you know, when I looked through this, and we hadn't done it this way, at least last year we didn't do it this way. I looked at the newer entities that were asking for money, and I loved what they were going after, you know, as far as what they were representing. But I didn't feel like sometimes, you know, they deserve to just, you know, because they're asking for 8,000, they deserve 8,000. That's why I reduced a lot of those considerably less. I still want to support them, but I didn't want to support them fully, I guess.
Kyle?
I think going with 7 is too restrictive. The only what, 8 of them, 1/3 of them get funded. I would say either, you know, if it was 5 or 6 council members, I don't know what that number is, you know, I would probably lean more towards 5, because there's a lot of 4s on there, and that would remove a lot of them. And then the other thing would be to either, rather than use the average of just the non-zeros, I would say use the average with the zeros in there.
A couple thoughts. I'm not supportive of the 7. We don't, I don't think that we have to make decisions based on majority or based on unanimous. I think majority is fine, which is why I don't have a problem with the way that staff has outlined it here. It's all majority votes except this 3 at the bottom, which did not get rewarded. I would also say, and Sam help me on this, was it the Crisis Center, or which one was it that Kelly came back, or you came back and recommended that we don't because the police are operating with a different entity? Was it Gateway?
Sorry, it's Gateway Domestic Violence Service and the Crisis Center. Gateway Domestic Violence is in Aurora and Crisis Center is local, so we are doing more references to Crisis Center at this point in time.
Okay, so I would suggest that we remove the 4,500 from Gateway, because I'm not sure that was clear to everyone. That y'all have to decide. And then take that 97.5, get it down to 85 by an equal cut of everybody on there. So if it means everybody, you take $25 off everybody's, which I don't think it's, I don't know, I'm not doing the math in my head. They said there wouldn't be math. But get it down to, I would say get it down to 85 minus that one. That would be my suggestion. And then honestly, you guys, this is not perfect. This does not have to be what you do next year. I think there needs to be some more thoughtful work on this. I think this, staff kudos. I mean, I think that this is about as fair as it gets in terms of what we all just dumped in there and you pulled it out. But I think that the rework has to start all the way at the beginning, where we accept asks from the nonprofits. I think we need to have a system there where it isn't as broad-based as it is. So, because I mean, the fact that we got, what was the slide, $160,000. That's, I think, yeah. So anyway, we've got 3 different ideas on the table. Are there any other ideas?
Well, I can't support a peanut butter spread. That doesn't work for anyone. No one wins there. Everyone gets a little bit, but again, it's sending the wrong message that put in an application, you'll get it. And 2, I think it compromises some of the organizations that with 15,000 they can really change something. They can make a significant impact And when we peanut butter spread it across everyone, then you minimize that potential impact. So I could not support just, kind of everyone gets something, which is essentially what's happening except for one. So if we wanna get to a 6 or a 7, I can support that, or even a 5 for that matter.
I think there's the same amount of 7s and the same amount of 4s. I mean, I would,
Yeah, so that doesn't, I can't support the, across the board, everybody gets something. That just,
And I wasn't, that we didn't have the criteria set up in the beginning saying if you funded it, 4 people agree to it. I mean, I went through and just, tried to give a little to everyone. Had I realized, if you don't give it to someone, there's a chance they may not get funding, I would have maybe done it a little differently.
Okay, Peggy's with Karina, you're with Karina? If we take it to 4,
No, well, up to 5.
up to 5? Karina, are you okay with 5?
that's fine.
Peggy?
5 with the new calculation including 0.
Okay, you've got 4, go, done.
So did you hear that?
They've got 4, Jared, sorry.
So 5 people supporting it and the average including the 0.
Correct. And the
Take
5 and
gateway
above,
out.
yes.
Gateway.
Yeah, they got 4, we're silent. All right, next.
No, I don't care, I just don't care for the way we've done this. Every year we talk about changing it.
That's right, that's my
I appreciate
next.
the time of it.
That's where we're going to next.
Yep.
Next, here we go. This one's a fun one too. You guys, you got it, Salmon?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Nice job.
All right, moving along.
Okay, before we dive into the open space, Mark and I have had a number of discussions. Number of discussions about the open space, and I think there's a couple of things that in our conversation that we had that we felt like I think there needs to be pretty much a big step backwards. And we don't normally do that. We're trying to keep going forward, but in this particular instance, there are a lot of things that are popping up, there are a lot of questions that people have, there's a lot of information out there, there's a lot of history and a lot of things that we, as a entire group, have bits and pieces of, but there is not a full collection of that information in this group.
Do you all have this sheet, this here now?
Is it in the
I
back?
found the pile sitting right here, so,
No,
because we created this afternoon for today's discussion.
Created this afternoon. No,
We don't really need that right now,
Okay.
but thank you. So what we're gonna suggest is that we look at approving what the ask is this year. Part of that is because we have some partnership obligations with South Suburban. But the caveat to that is a commitment from the council to put this as a priority, probably at your retreat. Keith has already indicated that this probably needs some sort of staff, whether it's a half an FTE, a quarter FTE, or a consultant, something like that. He said that 2 years in a row, and I don't wanna hear it a third. But
You won't be here.
So you won't hear it, so they won't be here, wish granted.
So say it again.
We'll send you a plan for it over.
The other thing is that I think that what the task force did was a good effort, but we are struggling with these pockets and we are struggling with the percentages because we see how fluid this whole thing is. And trying to prioritize between a large parcel of open space and a new playground, and it is all coming out of the same pot. And even though it is a nice amount of money, it's not enough for what we have on our list. The other thing I don't think that is being played well in this is that you guys have had the opportunity to actually see what has been done, to see the 12 years of progress or the 12 years of work with this open space money. This is the money that we're talking about. what we have done, why it was done, how it was done, who did it, what were the partnerships. Having that knowledge, I think, will help you guys be able to formulate decisions going forward, particularly in how we create these relationships that help fund these things, where we literally are able to fund a $4 million project and it only cost us $500,000. So, and what have we done? What is there? What has been done along the river? I know you all get around Littleton, you see a lot of the things, but I think putting together some sort of a tour where there's an opportunity to go through the list and actually see what was done and how it was done and what's left undone. There's property that was purchased that is sitting there with nothing done to it. That's not good service to the community in terms of using this open space funding to just buy land and let it sit there and not be able to be used for public. So having that kind of information, having some more detail into what are all the things that are going, we've got 5 or 6 different reports that hit trails and parks and open space. They're from South Suburban, they're from us, a couple from us, there's from South Platte Working Group, they're from Arapahoe County. All of those things really do have to go into formulating what your decisions are and really being able to feel better about your decisions. And I think that's going to be really important because we will be going back, Arapahoe County will be going back and asking for the sales tax to continue. So upon that happening, that would be like another 10 years. And there's an opportunity there for that money to even be asked for that to be used in more of a maintenance and not so much the heavy acquisition. So there's a lot of things I think that are going to be coming down the pipe that will help formulate some of your decisions. You're going to be getting more asks, you're going to need ways to be able to call through those, priority through those. And I think just kind of taking that step back and having that opportunity to really put this in a perspective that you are all part of and not just this piecemeal of information. Mark and then Peggy.
Yeah, I know I've talked to a couple of you about this topic and just adding to what the mayor's saying there. You know, we've got a draft transportation master plan that is intent to try to identify lots of different projects kind of related to, as well as their parks. The South Platte Working Group has got a similar conversation. We've got the Parks Master Plan, this recent effort here on the open space. I know the projects themselves are in the open space fund, but we're trying to go through a process here of looking at projects separate from the funding source and trying to establish priorities here. So when we talk about stepping back, I think it's an opportunity to try to kind of reconcile a lot of this work, and specifically the Transportation Master Plan, and decide what are the real priorities in there, then come back to look at the funding. So I realize there's kind of this iterative process in doing all that, but I think what I'm struggling with, and I think staff, is we got lots of plans. How do we bring it together so that the council has confidence that we truly have identified the priorities? And we're just not quite there, in my view, to look at the 5-year. And again, we've got relationships here with South Suburban specifically, and they rely upon us as a partner. And I realize there's kind of questions about what's that priority in future years. So my suggestion is that we look at the open space fund and certainly commit to the projects that are in 2020 with, as the mayor is suggesting, a commitment. You tell me that you want me as the city manager and staff to come up with a way to suggest to you to kind of take the step back and reconcile all these plans so that you do have more confidence in the future.
In tying onto that real quick, I think that having the opportunity to kind of experience what these asks are is key. I wanna go and see these playgrounds. I wanna see what ones are poor, I wanna understand that. I don't think we should take that as, just comes in and we just write checks on it. I wanna see what that property we may consider purchasing looks like. I wanna see how that benefits the trail system. I wanna see what does our money go to when we spend $500,000 a year at Carson Nature Center, or, you know, the management plan in South Platte Park. Where does $500,000 go? And understanding that, seeing that. I mean, if we wanna make different decisions, we can, but Carol and then Peggy.
I thought I was first.
Okay, Peggy and then Carol.
No offense. What you both are saying is really important. But two of us are not going to be here. Two who've been on here for 12 years. And potentially, this is not a jinx or a wish or a congratulations ahead of time, but two others may not be here. And so you may have 4 people who don't have anywhere near the grounding that we do. I almost feel like we ought to figure out a way to meet a couple of times longer and get to it. I've been, I think, to all the playgrounds in the city. We've gone to different playgrounds for some of our outreach. I mean, the playground areas for some of our outreach stuff. So I think we could do this if we really put our minds to it. But I'm not gonna push at that if you all don't think that's so. But I just want us to be aware that potentially we'll have a council that has an awful lot of learning to do.
And I appreciate that, Councilmember. Unfortunately, if the council, this present council is gonna approve this budget, we need a decision tonight. Because we have scheduled the 1st and the 15th, first reading on the 1st.
No, that's okay, but I thought Debbie was asking to delay this.
No,
Just
2020.
2020, just 2020.
We would have,
Oh, just.
2021.
Oh, just
Yeah,
do
that's
the
right.
one.
Maybe
just-
the- yeah,
Same thing.
we would do 2020, but these guys, they need a process going forward
It's a
and
good
not.
thing there's gonna be a new council.
I think we all vehemently agree. It sounds like you're agreeing with what they're saying.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I just didn't hear a piece of that, sorry.
Are you suggesting field trips?
Yeah,
That we go and
and actually,
get on a bus and go to
Yeah.
playgrounds?
I am.
I'll give you my kids and you can take them to the playground for a couple
I
hours.
don't,
Do that.
Take 2 buses.
and one of the things that got me to think about it a bit was the South Platte Working Group. When we had a number of people turned over on that group, we got on golf carts and we went up and down, and we brought folks from GoCo, right outdoors Colorado, who had done some legacy grants, and we got on golf carts on the trail.
Did you have a drink?
And no, we had water. And we went up and down, and so in Littleton, the Littleton folks talked about what we'd done, and then we got to Inglewood, Sheridan, and it was part of it was connected to the large charrette that we did. And having the visual and having that, being able to recognize and identify and understand, it really makes a lot of difference in how you feel about funding and how you see how much money will buy and how much money it costs to do things. And there's been so much change on the river and so many things that we did do that are now implemented that kind of getting somebody, there's a lot of folks that with the South Platte Working Group in Arapahoe County that can lead a good tour through what went on, so, yeah.
Another thought too is the significance of this issue has been highlighted by the work in Envision Littleton. It has come out crystal clear that this is a high value here for our community when it comes to kind of parks, open space and trails. So I think in response to that, I think it would be to our advantage to kind of take that time and try to reconcile all these studies here, specifically bringing the TMP now into the conversation to re-examine our priorities.
I'm not hearing any dissension.
No, I think
No,
we're all.
we're just keep talking.
Yeah.
I think that's a great approach, and I think that's where we wanted to be this year, but we didn't get there with the group that we put together. So I do have a couple of questions. What you're asking us to do is say, We know we have to do work, we know we have to look at this different, but we don't have that information now, and really the only decision we're asking for you to make now is, do you approve this or don't approve it? You're really not giving us something in the middle.
Sorry.
Because you don't have the information to say otherwise, it should go one way or another.
Yes,
So to that, I do have some questions to understand this a little bit better, because you're asking us to approve this that I was not ready to approve.
Let's do a yes and no.
Wait, I have a question first.
Okay.
So,
Is this on the 2020 projected?
2020, yes. Okay, so the work that was done to determine how much should we be funding each piece. So down below, it breaks out that we should be, if I understand this correctly, 1 million should be for parks and development, 700,000 for trails, and 1.2 for acquisition. So that was that split that was recommended by the working group.
That would be using all the reserves.
That's the reserve.
Just to get a sense of compared to each other, right? But when I look at what we're actually spending on parks, is we're going to spend a total of 1.2 million, but the recommendation, if I understand this correctly, should be somewhere around 1 million. So I feel like we're spending more than the recommendation from the working group.
Okay, so, sorry, one thing I wanna clarify is that a portion of the 1.2 million is grant funded. So the highlighted items on your detailed list of projects, so for example, Writers Vista, $400,000 of the 1.2 million is grant funded.
But isn't the 1 million that's down below also considering grant funding? So we are comparing apples to apples, is it not?
So the million below in the box, is that what you're looking at in the reserve section? So at the end of 2020, your total reserves in open space is 3 million. We're seeing that 1.269 million of that is reserved for parks and open space or acquisitions for next year.
So here's all I'm trying to get to. There was a recommendation made by a working group that said you should spend 70% here, 20% there, and 10% there, whatever that number was. So where do we line up in our 2020 projected to that recommendation?
So I think it's on the spreadsheet, just not what you're seeing. So I think we can provide that information to you.
So can you tell me, like, are we planning on spending in alignment with the recommendation from the working group?
I believe we are, but I'd like to clarify that.
So I'm willing to support this with the clarification that we're following what was given to us as a recommendation. And that's what this conversation should be about, right? We should have looked at this from that vantage point, so I just want that to me.
We know that, that's,
Okay.
we have that.
So we're verifying, not clarifying.
Yes, we're gonna verify. And
There's also a fourth category there, which is South Platte Park off the top.
so if because we accepted that recommendation at the time, and we may relook at it, but then we should be making our decisions based on that recommendation. I just wanna make sure that we are.
Okay. Next.
So we do have two policy questions, 17 and 18, and they're related to those projects, so. Okay, so the last topic, and we're 15 minutes ahead. Grant update, super quick, because we don't have much of an update. So Keith, you wanna update on the CMPI?
We're doing an update.
Well, at the time, we had some good information, but that kind of changed.
So the CMPI, CMPI, can just, I'm not gonna explain that whole acronym there, but. So we applied for 3 grants, 2 planning and 1 construction. There was basically $2 million available in the small infrastructure construction and $1 million in the planning. We were able to secure none of the planning grants. And we were able to secure $214,000 related to a project around downtown station to increase pedestrian safety, raise crosswalks, change the alignment, move the crosswalk further west across Littleton Boulevard there, and so we were able to secure a little over 200,000 for that. One of the things that we have decided as a team though, both us and community development, the last two submissions we've done in the infrastructure world, our planning projects were ranked basically last and next to last. So part of that is a reflection of the lack of a transportation plan and how that all fits together. So one of our primary working projects within the next year is to, now that we've got some additional staff as well, to help us refine our targeting in that area to help us be more successful specifically in the planning areas and securing grants on the transportation side of the house. But it's, you know, it's good news. We got the other two we didn't get funded were downtown mobility and downtown streetscape.
It's good learning.
And that's, you know, that's something that is absolutely visible and current, and you know, our citizens will see it and experience it, and just making our streets safer, so I think that's awesome.
Think positive, you can only improve.
That's right. Those thoughts, I know it's come up,
We'll go up.
before, but the crosswalk right there at Grand Station, getting some flashing lights here, has that come up,
Where at?
right, Grand Station?
And Bega
Bega
Park,
Station?
Bega Park.
Bega Park, the restaurant.
Oh, Grand State, okay.
Right as you're crossing from Beer Park over Grand Station.
So that would be an RRFB, rapid flashing beacon. Rapid repeating flashing beacon from a transportation nerd standpoint. We are looking at that particular location. We have there's some warrant issues there, but part of that is, you know, we're doing the other side of Bega Park related to this, and that'll change the alignment over there a little, so that's part of the consideration. It's not in the project right now, but that's an intersection that, like, I walk through frequently, so.
Sure, I almost got over there too.
You know, it's because we're tall, they can see.
We stick above everything.
So there's, as we're recognizing, there's so many opportunities, that's just through DRCOG, and there's so many opportunities outside of DRCOG. But one other opportunity that came forward with DRCOG that we did not take advantage of was funding that's coming not for transportation, but the other area that they're focused on is aging population. And so that's another key pillar of DRCOG. And there was a funding opportunity for programs, and so cities and programs that support an aging population. So something like Meals on Wheels would have been easy, $5,000, it would have met their needs here. So now that we have the staff, and now that we're much more engaged with DRCOG, please know that there are other grant opportunities that we can take advantage of or help some of our partners here or other entities in the city to take advantage of. That's
How are we coming along with the grant writer?
Well, kind of a sad story. Tiffany just pulled me in here. We had made an offer, somebody was supposed to show up, was it this week?
No, October 7th.
Yeah, and they decided not to show up, so we're back advertising again, so unfortunately that didn't go well.
Well, Reed knows how to write them, he's got that.
Yeah.
In our world, that falls to the transportation planner, so Shane's certainly earning his keep in the last year.
Yeah, we'll get it solved here, it's just that one didn't work out. I'll do one quick update here, USCIS. I think we shared with you back on the 7th that it looked pretty good because we got some kind of preliminary notice. Unfortunately, it did not play out, so they denied us.
So that was a $250,000 grant over a 2-year period that we had applied for.
And was that for,
Yes.
What was it for?
immigrant initiative?
The grant, the USCIS grant, the immigrant initiative.
So we didn't get that one?
We did not get
We
that.
did not.
Then we kind of think that was gonna happen anyway. I think that's what we were thinking.
Well, we were told that
We
it
were
might.
hoping.
Yeah, but we prepared.
Yeah.
Right, that's what I was thinking. We didn't think it was gonna happen anyway.
No,
Well,
budget
they told us at
reflects
the
a
last
9
meeting
million.
that it would. Like,
Yeah.
So
we
now
did-
what?
oh, well.
So now what?
The
But
budget,
on that realm, we did receive a $9,000 grant, so that's gonna help a little bit.
That's good.
But we're still, looking for opportunities on funding that program. It's very competitive right now.
So another tool within DRCOG is that it's like they have a access to all grants, even outside of DRCOG, so it's an easy way to search for certain tools. I don't know if you guys have taken advantage of that yet.
We did reach out to
That might also, as you're doing the priority-based budgeting, that may be a program that actually could serve it better, could be better served if it was more regional as opposed to, it would also probably make itself more friendly to those types of grants and stuff too, if it was on a larger regional basis. But that's been one we've been struggling with, and losing that ground is challenging.
I have asked other city managers in this part of the metro area if they would want to contribute, and they said, no, thank you, and thanked us for taking this on.
Oh, that was nice of them.
Did we get any feedback of why?
Maybe we should talk to their councils.
Now, we only committed to it for what, 4 or 5 years to.
Yeah, we had a history of that, yeah, and
And
it's, yeah. Last year was the first year we did not get the grant funding.
Right.
We did raise the fees, if you remember that, to try to recover some of the costs, so we did improve a little bit on that, but still, a big piece of this thing is
In
not.
the course of the priority budgeting, I'm assuming it's not very high.
It's a community value, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
The other thing, Mark, you had asked me to mention health benefits.
Oh, yes. One of the issues that came up on the 7th here was whether or not the city council could take advantage of the city's clinic. And so after discussing this with the mayor, I have a proposal here that specifically this needs to be probably evaluated next year, because I'm asking HR to kind of evaluate some options here on kind of the healthcare for the general employees. And add some more options like a high deductible. We don't have those options now. If we were to add the council can't take advantage of the clinic without being on our health plan. And so, because we have limited options, the cost here is at least $100,000 annually to bring the council on board. And so I think, let us look at these options here and maybe resurrect this issue here sometime next year.
Kyle, just give us a raise and we're good.
You may not have any,
Flu shot.
you may not have any old toads on the council in the future.
You're
At least
healthier than most everybody here.
No, I'm not, but you don't, I mean, I'm the only one that's got a zipper for open heart
Oh, there you
surgery.
go. Oh, there you go. I need to know where you're going with that.
But, so some of us, are retired and are on Medicare and whatever, so I can't see why they wouldn't at least allow some services.
It is, we just have to pay for it. It changes every 2 years.
Some cities do allow council to take advantage of some options when it comes to healthcare. So it's a legitimate question. I'm just suggesting that we probably look to next year where I've got more options and have a better idea financially of what that could mean in total. This year, it just would be very expensive.
We gotta find a way to pay for what we're supposed to pay for, not add more expenses.
Thank you.
And that was simply a suggestion, there's a clinic and we run over and get a
Is that your
flu
campaign
shot.
speech, Jerry?
It doesn't need to be any bigger deal than that, if you're
Correct.
reevaluating things, that's fine, but it was just simple like that, we always, Mark?
One other just miscellaneous issue, I had a question come up here just about, a project that we have in 2019 for the remodel here, space needs for this building. Can't remember what the budget was, 1.6 million. And this, if you remember this conversation from last year, this is impact fees. So this is coming from new development that have paid a fee for kind of their impact on this community when it comes to all sorts of different kind of facilities. And the ones we're using for this building is specifically for facilities. It can only be used for facilities. It cannot be used for any other purpose. And it is only
What's the definition of facilities?
We own 36 buildings. Is it 36? 36.
Got rid of some of those fire.
35 and a half.
Okay, well, that's right, we got rid of some of the fire, but, so 30 some odd buildings that are everything from this building, Public Works, museum, library, the list is some very big buildings, some very small. And so it's about adding only capacity to those buildings based on that impact fee definition. So it's a very narrow definition of what those fees can be used for. And it is specifically to add capacity for basically staffing purposes. That's it. And so we have a project here that is likely gonna get, I know it's gonna get carried on into 2020. So I know the Public Works is in the process of looking at hiring an architect and a CMGC. It's I don't know if I wanna get into the detail of that.
Just tell us what they're gonna do.
Yeah, so it's a combination, it's much like how we built the fire station, Station 19, quite honestly, same model. And you'll hear more about that, but you know, if you have additional questions about it, but it is in the
What we
budget.
paid for and gave away.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that
Yeah,
again.
let's do that.
Those two RFPs are on the street right
I was
now.
gonna,
Thanks for bringing it up.
yeah, so anyways, I had a good joke there, but I think I'll just leave it alone. So anyways, if you have more questions about it, but it is a very specific purpose and only can be used for that purpose.
So, so I'm getting questions from just the community and some citizens of, you know, what does that entail? What is the 1.6 going to be spent on? So will you be sharing, I don't know, at what
Oh,
point?
yeah, sure.
Like here's where we're adding capacity, here's how we're going to be able to better serve our citizens? Because that was actually one of the questions I asked when we approved this was, how do we measure the value to the citizen? And I don't know that we've gotten there.
Yeah, we haven't done any design work, so I can't answer that question. That's why we're hiring an architect and the CMGC at the same time, so they're at the table with us simultaneously, so we can try to maximize the value and the dollars that we have available to create the most value for the community and for
Are you doing the service center or are you doing something in the city?
No, we're doing, that's just here. We have a project ongoing at the service
So
center.
it's just remodeling your offices,
Well,
moving things around. We've done it upstairs, we did it, Kelly's
Priority
place moved
is
in.
should be the service center.
It's
We
that.
talked about how dangerous it is.
well, we have a study underway right now to, we brought in a design and engineering firm specifically in that area that's going to look at our current capacity needs, our future capacity needs, and you know, really what we need to do going forward to support the city operations to do that and provide us some scenarios for that, so.
So the 1.6 million is just for city center, it's not for the service center.
No.
Right.
The problem, this is again the challenge with impact fees. Building 2 at the service center is a complete scrape and start over. And so you can't use impact fees solely for that purpose. It only can add capacity. So the fact that we have kind of a derelict building here to a large extent, we have to add additional funds to kind of replace in kind. If you want to add to the structure in size, that's where impact fees are targeted. Very specific legal purpose for impact fees.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like,
Decrease the size of this room a
I'd
little
like
bit.
to know more about that.
We did that to make it quieter.
Okay, any other questions? City attorney?
Oh, she wrote.
All right, we're adjourned.
Okay. All right.
Good job.